Hello friends, today we will again talk about film as a teaching aid, and in the earlier lecture where I talked about film as a teaching aid, we talked about how cinema as a medium of information, education and communication apart from entertainment plays an important role. So how we have to see this audio visual form of media and how the areas which have been covered by cinema in various fields create this kind of a situation where cinema as an academic discipline has to be taken seriously by the social scientists as well as scholars. So continuing from the earlier talk, I would like to suggest that British censorship of those times was very reactionary, arbitrary and politically inspired, and any kind of reference to nationalism or national ideas, it was rejected by the colonial censors during that point of time, and many of the films they were being the dialogues they were being cut by the British when they did not find that those dialogues were in consonance with their own ideas, and any kind of patriotic ideas which were relating to democracy, independence, they were being removed by the British. We also find that some organizations like Progressive Writers Association and IPTA, which is the Indian People's Theatres Association, both of them they made some kind of significant contribution to the films as well during the colonial period and thereafter. And Progressive Writers Association, some of the members, those who got associated with the Progressive Writers Association, they brought fresh ideas to the scripting department of the films. On the other hand, Indian People's Theatres Association, IPTA, which was formed in 1943 and which was a cultural wing of the Communist Party of India, and some of the actors and directors they were associated with the IPTA. For example, Balraj Sahani was quite closely associated with IPTA. Then K. Abbas as a filmmaker was associated with IPTA, and one of his films, Dharti Ke Lal, was supported by IPTA and produced by IPTA as well. So we find that it made some kind of an important contribution in those times. Progressive Writers Association, Munshi Premchand, he became the president of this association, and he also contributed to one of the films which was titled as Mil or Mazdoor, though he did not like the kind of changes which were made to his story, the way it was being cinematized, the kind of cinematic liberty which was taken. But these kind of ideas they came to the film industry, and they tried to revive the kind of changes which were there. Some of the films during that time, one of the films called Dahej, which was made by V. Shantaram, which was talking in the framework of the issue of Dahej or dowry, and how when this film was made in 1950 and thereafter, we find that a bill was introduced in the Legislative Assembly in Bihar. So V. Shantaram talks about this idea where he suggests that how his film might have influenced the legislators, those who were there, and these people might have seen it and might have been influenced so that such kind of a bill was introduced. Apart from that, we find that many of the films which were made during this time were talking in the framework of the partition themes as well, though we do not find as late as M.S. Satyu's Garm Hawa in 1973. Before that, the kind of films which were made on partition, they were very less and very far between. They were not directly dealing with the issue of partition, and there was a film called Lahore in 1949, then Dhool Ka Phool which was made, and Dharmputra, which were in a way trying to communicate some kind of ideas which were associated with the partition. And we find that how people, those who got displaced during this time of partition, they were being called refugees in their own homelands, and how they settled in the various refugee colonies. And this kind of a trauma, this fear, personal pain, violence, it could also be seen during this point of time when you have these kind of riots during that period when the partition takes place. And the ideas of sexuality and gender relations, where the bodies of women they became site of conflict between two communities, could also be seen in the partition films. Recently there is a partition archive which has been established, and how this partition archive that way is trying to collect and recollect the stories of the people, the events which took place during that time, their personal experiences, any kind of literature or ideas which are there of those times, how they are being shared in the partition archive. And we also find that the films which are made on partition, like Garm Hawa, as I told you, in 1971, Lahore in 1949, Gadar Ek Prem Katha in 2001, Pinjar in 2003. So these are some of the films which are made, which have been quite popular. Also Gadar especially became quite popular, and Pinjar thereafter, written by Amrita Pritam, was also based on her story, and how Pinjar tries to give this kind of an impression that how women, those who remained in Pakistan, or maybe the women, those who remained in India, how they were how they left their own families and then they became part of that particular country during that time. Then we also see that how a lot of emphasis is being placed on the alternate sources when we try to compare that how cinema is to be seen. Personal diaries, they also become some kind of a source in terms of writing about films, and this we saw in a film called Rang De Basanti, where we find that the personal diary of an officer during the colonial period becomes some kind of a trigger point for a family member to come to India. Similarly, the letters, pamphlets, memoirs, all of them they provide this kind of an information, and all these can be used as some sort of alternate sources by which we can try to recreate history. Similarly, the oral sources in the framework of interviews, in the framework where interviews can be used to recreate those times. And similarly, we can also find that cinema and films, they can also provide an information about that particular period. And we have also seen that how Indian cinema has used literature in terms of depiction of the partition experiences. So when we are trying to talk about film as a teaching aid, we find that apart from the various kind of institutions which have been established, we find that films, there are various kinds of film or media departments in different universities. And at the same time, in how some of the films like Lagan, they became important in the framework that how leadership issues they are to be handled. Films like Three Idiots, they are being taught in IIMs. Similarly, Lagan was also taught in IIMs in terms of leadership issue. So all these things they have to be understood from that perspective. This is a slide in which I would like to communicate about a film called Kamoshpani. And Kamoshpani was a film which was made by Sahiba Sumar, and this film is also in a way reflecting the trauma of a woman who was left behind in Pakistan. And when she is left behind, she is being converted.
बाबूजी ते मैनू मेरे हाल ते छड्डो वीरो उठ जाओ वापस जाओ.
So we see in this film that how a woman, she refuses to commit suicide. She is left behind in Pakistan, and she has a son who is an extremist and who doesn't know that this woman was a Sikh woman and how she was converted to Islam. And thereafter when the son is extremist and behaving like that, and one of the brothers of this woman, he comes to this village trying to locate his sister, and when she is relocated, she realizes that she has been completely there in her entire family, and her own country, and she is not ready to go back with her brother. So that was the kind of a situation where so many women, both in India as well as in Pakistan, they stayed in both these places. They adopted the kind of family in which they were there, and thereafter they had to, in a way, they created their own families, and they were not concerned with their earlier families of origin. And these kind of films, they communicate an idea that how being human is comparatively more important, and how one should not relate to a particular religion, because that is not all that important. But at the same time, it also conveys the kind of violence in the framework of the rape, murder which were being committed during the partition times. And the Partition Museum in a way tries to communicate these kind of ideas. Apart from that, some of the films like neorealist films, they were also made. Neorealism was a movement in Italian cinema, and Italian influence could be seen in the framework of non-professional actors, outdoor locations, and the simple dialogues. And the issues in the neorealist films, when we say, we find that issues were dealing with the day-to-day issues of unemployment, poverty. So these were the kind of ideas which could be seen in the neorealist films. When we talk about the neorealism as a movement in the Italian cinema, and how neorealism as a kind of influence in the Indian cinema could be seen in the films like Do Biga Zameen of Bimal Roy, where the issue of depeasantization is there, that how a person who comes from a village because his land is mortgaged there, and he comes to Calcutta so that he can earn some money and get back his land. So the idea is to get back the 2 biga zameen which belong to him, but at the same time we realize that it is the person who wants to purchase his land wants to create a kind of factory there. So this issue of depeasantization, where the person will not remain a peasant, he will not remain like a farmer, that was there. Similarly, a film called Jagte Raho by Raj Kapoor, it talks about the kind of society in which we live, where the more important aspect is not in the framework of what we are, but the more important issues is what we are trying to project in the society, and the kind of issues which were happening in that particular chawl, where so many criminal activities, so many activities which were not moral in nature, they were happening, but at the same time the society is trying to project itself in such a way. The people, those who are there in that particular flats, they are trying to project themselves in such a way as if they are the more pious ones. So these kind of films, they in a way try to communicate that society is not all that perfect. For example, Pyasa also by Gurudutt also tries to communicate this idea, where he is in a way disillusioned with the kind of changes which are happening in the society. Apart from that, we see other films like Do Biga Zameen, Sujata, which is talking about untouchability. Then we have the pessimism in Devdas. Then another film called Admi, which was made in 1939, which was talking about the optimism. Then Pyasa, Kagaz Ke Phool and Sahib Bibi aur Gulam, made by Gurudutt, which are seen to be some sort of a trilogy. So we find that these kind of films like Sujata, which is talking about the issue of untouchability, where you find that a family has allowed an untouchable girl to be grown up in their own particular family due to certain circumstances or reasons. So they do not have a problem with that girl, but when there is a groom who has to marry the daughter of the house, and he becomes interested in the untouchable girl or Sujata, then the problem crops up. And how the other family is also not interested in this girl, that they want that she should be married away before the marriage of Sunil Dutt takes place with the daughter of the house. So these kind of ideas, they are there in such kind of films. And Devdas has been made and remade by so many filmmakers. It was made in 1935 by P.C. Barua in Hindi as well as in Bengali, and it was showing kind of pessimism in the society, which was again in a way rejected by others like V. Shantaram makes Admi. Then you have certain films like Andaz, Aan, Mother India, all these films which were made in 1940s and 50s, and how it was a remake of Aurat. We find Mother India was a remake of Aurat. Aurat was made in 1940, and how nation is being seen as mother in this film. So these kind of comparisons, where there is a kind of a debate between scholars, those who say that how you cannot see nation as mother, and there are others, those who conform to this idea that as family is seen to be one part, and nation is an extension of that family. So these kind of ideas, they are also being shown there. And ideas of nation building, ideas of Nehruvian socialism could also be seen in films like Paigam, Naya Daur, etc. And in 1970s we find that Amitabh Bachchan, he comes to the scene, and his image as angry young man, and how he is anti-establishment, and how he is seen as hero of the masses. So all these kind of ideas in the various films, they try to project about Amitabh Bachchan, and especially in 1970s we find that we have this issue of the movement, the kind of a movement of JP movement which was led. We have the issue of emergency, and 1970s people, they realized that that they became independent, and the independence has been, it's been around more than 23 years since they became independent. And thereafter, in the decade of the 70s, the mood was that some kind of a change in the society is needed. And after independence also, people, they have not been able to secure their rights, they have not been able to secure a lot of privileges which they should have secured at some point of time. So we find that these kind of ideas, they try to communicate about that society, and film, they become some sort of a teaching aid when we are talking about the political developments of those times. And other kind of stream of films in those times was, one was the middle class cinema, where you have Hrishikesh Mukherjee's films like Chupke Chupke, Golmaal, Khoobsurat, Bawarchi, and Basu Chatterjee's Choti Si Baat. So these are the filmmakers which were making some sort of a cinema which was middle class in nature, where you will not find that, not a very heavy star cast, but the focus was on the stories with which the middle classes will be able to relate. And these stories are presented to the audience in such a simple manner that these films, they became very, very popular. And the people, those who made such kind of films, especially Hrishikesh Mukherjee and Basu Chatterjee, they continued with this kind of a trend, and their cinema became quite popular as well. Apart from that, we have the parallel cinema during this time. We have the issue of poverty, daily life struggle, and filmmakers like Govind Nihalani, who made Ardh Satya and Akrosh, Shyam Benegal with Ankur, Nishant, Manthan, Bhumika, which were his 4 initial films. And Shyam Benegal later also made a number of films like Junoon, which was on 1857 Mutiny, and then Zubaida in 2001, Kalyug in 1981, and in so many films which have been made by Shyam Benegal, the kind of issues with which he has dealt, the kind of ideas which he has communicated, that how this kind of a struggle of power, this kind of a struggle of over privilege which is there in the society. And in Ankur, which means seedling, this kind of a seedling is seen in the last scene when a boy throws a stone on the window. So and then you have this in the film called Manthan, you have this cooperative movement where the film was financed by 5 lakh cooperative personnel who were associated with the cooperative in the context of the milk revolution which took place, and how rupees 10 lakhs were collected with that 2 rupee kind of a contribution which was made by these farmers, or the people, those who were associated with the milk movement. And this film also became quite popular. Apart from that, we also find that cinema also or films, they provide some kind of an insight about how women, they are being stereotyped in our films, and they are seen to be either good or bad. They do not have any kind of shades of grey, and the popular cinema reinforces these kind of images where either we have heroine or we have a vamp. So these kind of ideas where patriarchal norms of the society, they are being shown to the audience, and women, they are not seen in the shades of grey, and either we have a heroine who is ready to sacrifice everything for the entire family or for the country, and on the other hand we have a vamp who is ready to compromise in every way. So this kind of a characterization where there is a lot of stereotyping, where a woman has to give up her own ambitions, her own desires, and she has to in a way conform to what is happening in the society. She has to conform to what her parents are saying, she has to conform to what her brother is saying. When she is married, then she has to conform to her in-laws and to her husband. So this kind of a stereotyping is there in the society, where the narratives of the Hindi cinema are male dominant, and they are male centric in nature, and heroine is always very secondary to hero. She does not have any kind of independent existence, and her journey in the film is explored in relation to the male character. So this in a way limits the role of woman, and she is only seen as in terms of providing some kind of a glamour, relief, respite and entertainment. So what we find that this kind of stereotyping has been done away with in many of the films in the later times, that how some of the films which are dealing with the women as a protagonist, like English Winglish, where you see that it is a more women centric film, and there was another film called Sulu which came recently, which was again Kahani, for example. So these kind of cinema, these kind of films, they also communicate about the gender relations. They also communicate about the position of women in the society, how women, they are being portrayed. Apart from that, we also find that the kind of changes which have come because of the liberalization, how more and more multiplexes they have come up during the liberalization, globalization and privatization, and there is a lot of more focus on the script, and big studios, they have also come up. So what we find is that especially in 1990s we find that there is more focus on the script, and small budget films, they are also being made during this time, and there is a lot of experimentation with the themes and the presentation during this period. You can see the clip. So there is some kind of continuing journey that way, that how young generation is trying to associate themselves with an event which took place more than 100 years back. Now, because the film was made in 2008, but even now this film is quite popular and has been seen by so many people, and the kind of changes which came in 1990s when film for the NRI audience, they were being made, and Karwa Chauth, Dandiya, all these kind of things, they were being shown to the audience, and how this Coca-Colonization and McDonaldization of the society takes place. So this clip is from DDLJ, Dilwale Dulhaniya Le Jayenge, where this scene of Karwa Chauth is being shown. So we find that films like DDLJ, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai, Kal Ho Na Ho, all of them, they were being made for an NRI audience, and NRI audience was in a way liking such kind of films which were slick in production, and at the same time we find that regressive customs and rituals like Karwa Chauth, they were also being promoted in some way because of the commercialization which was happening in the society, and how these kind of festivals which has some kind of a regressive value, they became more popular in many other parts of the other parts of India where they were not even celebrated earlier. So we find that this the new kind of films later which were made, I told you about English Winglish by Gauri Shinde, then Neel Bate, Sannata, Dangal, etc. All of them, they were trying to portray women in a different manner. And you have a clip of film Dangal where it is being shown that how women, they have brought laurels to the country in different ways, in the field of sport and in other fields as well. That so many women, they have got secured medals for India in various international competitions. So such kind of portrayals are also very, very important. And then you have these product placements in cinema, that how product placement could also be seen. There is another clip from a film called Three Idiots,
instruments that
which is talking in that framework that how
information that are illustrative,
we should now focus more in the framework of changes in the education system. We should not focus on the rote memory, rather more and more experimentation, innovations they should come in this sector. So to end the discussion, I would like to suggest that Indian cinema industry is the largest industry in terms of films, and though in many languages films they are being made, but they have so many same emotions, and this kind of a journey, which is a monumental journey, it continues even now. So thank you very much.